Super honored to be here and sort of speaking to you all. I'm going to share a little bit about my career path and how I've gotten to where I am today. But I'm going to sort of position it in a way around fairy tales, I think, that we all grew up with, and what are the lessons that we can learn from there as we apply it to our career. Hopefully this will help you as you're thinking about your career path, as you're thinking about building and developing your teams, as you're thinking about building and developing your network and your community. Hopefully these are some lessons that you can also take and apply in your own career. So the first story I'm going to start with is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So just to level set, because I think there's varying variations of how this story goes. If you get over the breaking in and entering, essentially a young child finds a house in the forest, goes in, and decides that she's going to sample everything in this house at some point, right? So she tries the porridge. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's just right. She tries a chair. It's too hard, it's too soft, it's just right. And ultimately falls asleep. And really the lesson you can learn from here is your career is a bunch of trial and error to find your passions, right? And so if I look back at my career, I did actually start my undergraduate work in STEM, right, in computer engineering. I won't tell you what year that was, but essentially it was a random number generator was AI, and the language was COBOL, so relatively long time ago. But I ran out of funds. I couldn't finish my degree. I couldn't finish my education. And so I had to decide, what am I going to do? What was I passionate about, and what was I going to do for my first real adult job? And so I did what lots of people in the US do when they have no money. They join the military. So I joined the Army. In the US Army, I had the chance to work on Apache helicopters. So I did the weapons and electrical systems because I had a choice between infantry, which is essentially holding a gun on the front line, or getting into technology on the Apaches, which at the time was the latest sort of technology that you could be involved in. This was heads-up displays. Before it was in your car, it actually originated on the Apache helicopter. And so it was a way for me to really understand technology, really stay connected to technology in a way that was going to let me sort of have a career. The problem is when you get out of the military, how do you translate that into the civilian world? So, I mean, very few people have Apache helicopters sitting in their backyard that they need you to come fix the 50mm machine gun on. And if you know anybody that has one of those in their backyard, you should move like very, very quickly. But so I tried to decide, what did I really like about my job in the Army? And it was the technology. It was being on the leading edge of something. So I decided I was going to go back to school and work on my Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer, because I knew I was going to go work for Microsoft. I just didn't know how to get in. So got a job at a computer repair shop. So I was doing hardware repair because I had turned screwdrivers, and I wanted to be connected with technology, and did night school. I managed to land a job at Microsoft after doing hardware repair for about a year. And I spent the next 23 years with Microsoft. So originally hired to support Internet Explorer 5 on Windows 3.1. So again, dating myself a little bit, but it was a great opportunity. At that time, Microsoft was really the only player in the sort of enterprise space of software, right? A very, very early a mission of a PC on every desktop, right? And so Bill was really sort of driving this vision and this mission. Office had just come out, like they had combined all of these products to make a single product, and what was that going to look like, and how were we going to evolve? So I did that for a few years, and then decided I wanted to get into the enterprise space. I had this job. I really still love the technology, but people calling me to tell me that they couldn't browse to whatever website was not sort of where I wanted to spend the rest of my career. We survived Y2K, and I made the move into enterprise support. Supporting automotive manufacturers. So out of the US, if you think of the big three, I was located in Detroit and sort of really helped them think end to end. How do you think about your technology platform? How do you sort of solve any of those sort of technical issues that you have? I stayed in that role for a long time, for 10 or 11 years, and realized that I wasn't being challenged. I wasn't learning the next thing. And so through trial and error, I sort of tried to figure out, okay, is it just the industry? Is it just the customer? Is there some other way that I can give myself a challenge to learn something? And I just couldn't seem to find it. So I went to law school, which is what everybody does when you can't find a challenge, right? You pick on another formal education methodology. So I worked Monday through Friday, and I did law school on Saturday and Sunday. for 3 years with 2 young kids who can now tell you all the elements of homicide, and I got called into the principal's office for that one. But that was really a way for me to figure out, how do I challenge myself? How do I find that next thing that I'm going to be passionate about? And I was going to be a lawyer at Microsoft. Absolutely was going to go to law school, pass the bar, and become a lawyer at Microsoft. Best of intentions. Microsoft Legal then told me, go leave, practice for 5 or 10 years, and then come back. And at this time, I had like 12, 13 years at the company, and sole supporter for family. There was no way I was going to leave the company and come back. So what were my passions? What were the things I liked to do? And that was executive presentations. I presented in front of judges, right? It was logical troubleshooting, formulating a legal argument. So how could I translate those things into a job? And that's where I landed in my first data job. Started with a group, really thinking about how do we leverage data to change the way Microsoft does business. At that time, we were just starting our own internal transformation. Satya had just come in as the CEO. And so we were really starting to think about, how do we as an organization become more data driven? How do we think about leveraging data to actually change the way that we interact with our customers, that we deliver go-to-market strategies, that we do licensing models? And so it was a great, great time to be early into that data space. So I managed a team of analysts for a few years and then realized I wanted to be an executive. I wanted to go down that CVP path. I wanted to find the next challenge that was going to give bigger impacts to the organization. But it had to be in data, right? Because if you really thought about it, even 10, 15 years ago, data was sort of new and upcoming. Every organization was really trying to figure out how do they use and harness the power of their data. So I went to the office of the CTO at Microsoft, where I worked on end-to-end cross-vertical data solutions. So this is early blockchain, early sort of trusted ledger. How do you think about cross-industry or verticalization? How do you leverage data more effectively? Which was great. Brilliant architects. Realized I was not an architect via trial and error, so it was not for me. What I did like was changing business processes. How do you build cultures? How do you build organizations? How do you actually drive the people part of change? And so I took on a chief operating officer role with Azure Data Engineering, which was a relatively large organization, same size as many companies, I guess, within Microsoft. So several thousand employees. And we were actually exponentially growing. So we grew 5x in the 2 to 3 years that I was with that organization. But these were all data engineers. These were all passionate, technical engineers. And so how do you get them to actually think about using data as a business, right? So where do you allocate headcount? Where do you put budget? Where do you sort of drive the frameworks and the capabilities of the organization internally to use data to make their day-to-day decisions? And so that was a phenomenal opportunity to really think about, as we grew from 1,000 to 5,000, how do you do those types of things? And so great opportunity. Then about 3 years ago, Microsoft UK called me and said, we're hiring the first chief data officer at Microsoft. And do you know anybody who would be interested in that role? Thank you. I would love to. So I wrote the job description. And I said, oh, I'm a perfect fit. How about that? And so we created the first CDO at Microsoft. Today, almost every country and subsidiary has a CDO role. So super proud that we were sort of able to think about internal to Microsoft. You make no platform or technology decisions. So it really is all about the culture. It's all about changing processes, bringing people along on that journey, and how do you do that? And so because that's where I knew my passion was, via all of the experiences that I had, that's what I wanted to do, was sort of drive that transformation. And then about 7 weeks ago, I decided to make the leap and challenge myself one more time. And so I've joined Databricks as one of the field chief technology officers, really trying to figure out how do you break down those silos between analytics and BI, all the way up to AI and machine learning. And there's just such a great opportunity there. So super excited to take that data culture into the AI ML space as a result. The next story I want to tell you about is the ugly duckling. So my version of the ugly duckling is essentially egg hatches in this family of ducks. Everybody looks at him and says, oh my gosh, what are you? Like, you're not like us. What do you look like? So he wanders around for a while trying to find his family, and it ultimately turns out he's a swan, and he should have been born into the swan family. But what I want you to take from this story is really outward appearances. It's horrible. Outward appearances always aren't what they seem. So I know lots of you have probably been reading about this quietly quitting and sort of looking at people and having this assumption that you know what's going on with them and that they've given up and, oh my gosh, get them off the team, get them out of the org. I would caution you, right? Things are not always what they seem when you look at people. Lots of times I get asked when people look at my resume, like, why did you stay in that one job for 12 years? And what I've shared is that I was in a very abusive relationship. And so I had to actually load up my kids in the car, move cross country and live in hiding for 2 years. And so if you had looked and said, why don't you care about work? Why aren't you driving that next project? Why aren't you pushing for your next career step? One, none of your business, but two, I have other stuff going on, right? Like from the out, would have never known. I was still delivering. I was still meeting my expectations, meeting my obligations. But at the same time, I had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life that put my career on the back burner. And that's okay, right? It's okay that you have this balance during the course of your life. And things aren't always going to be this linear, constant, exponential increase in your role and your responsibility. So I would caution you, think about your own career and do you have that right balance? And when you look around and you think about your team and your allies and your infrastructure, make sure that you're giving them that leniency as well. And then the last one is the three little pigs. So with the three little pigs, this is obviously three little pigs. One of them builds their house out of sticks, one out or straw, sticks, and brick. And obviously the one that did brick took much, much longer. Big bad wolf comes, blows down the houses. The only one that survives is the brick, right? Sticks and straw are gone. So really put time into your, sorry about the slide. Put time into your foundation, right? So if you think about it, I think very late in my career did I think about my network. Very late in my career did I think about getting beyond just those people who were my champions or my fans, right? I had great managers and great peers that I had worked with who thought I did a great job. And I always sort of thought they would help me find my next job. They would help me find my next career, but that wasn't their job. They were there to just encourage me. What I needed was mentors and champions, right? And so when you think about your mentors, make sure that you're putting the time into finding mentors that are going to help you build that capability or competency that you want to develop. So I always try to tell my mentees, look across your ecosystem and try to find somebody that exhibits a behavior that you want to grow or develop. For me, one of my first manager jobs, I got told that I was a robot, right? That I wasn't human, that I couldn't connect. And so I looked across my organization and found an amazing female leader who I thought demonstrated empathetic listening very, very well. And so I approached her and just asked, will you be my mentor and help me with this skill, with this competency? Because I want to be a better leader. I want to drive better organizations. Those people will be very different than your champions. Your champions are people across your network and your ecosystem that are actively thinking about other roles that they might come aware of, other opportunities that are being created where you are the perfect fit. And they are the ones who are going to help you bridge that gap. You have to make sure as you're building your foundation, really put time into these communities, into this effort to build those capabilities. And this is one of the reasons that I love Women in Data, to be honest with you. I think it's a great opportunity. And since I've moved to the UK, really has been helpful about building that network, building that ecosystem, connecting with me, with people that I would never come into contact in my daily life, that are mentors, that are peers, that are mentees, that are my cheerleaders, that are my capability to be able to broaden my horizon. And with that, I'll open up for questions because we're all going to live happily ever after.
Thank you, Robin. We're going to open the floor for some questions. So the happily ever after bit beforehand. Tell us, Robin, you are actually speaking again this afternoon after this on data culture, which really is a sweet spot for you.
Yes, absolutely.
And what time are you on? It's 3 o'clock?
3:30 at the Lake
3:30.
House. So.
Okay. So have we got some questions for Robin? I'm going to come to you, Paul. I know you've got some marathon questions. We can save that. Any questions at all? Hello.
Yes, how have you dealt with stigmas around women and female leaders in not just corporate, but especially in tech?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. If you think about my very first grown-up job, right? I was in the U.S. Army in Korea, South Korea, and if I looked around, I was one of one female in like a group of 1,000. And so I think for me, my whole career has been male-dominated, and so I think early in my career, before I definitely would take a back seat, sort of. Because I wasn't the majority, I would definitely defer. I think as I got into the second half of my career, I had a great female leader once tell me, you've earned your right to be at the table, sit at the table. Like, don't sit that one row back. Think about it. Every time you walk into a room, I can guarantee you, if you look at the seats around the room, it's primarily the women and the men are sitting at the table. Show up early, sit at the table. You have the absolutely right to be there. And so for me, it's really having to be not aggressive, right? But very cognizant of where am I sitting in the room? What are the conversations I'm having? I have the experience now, and you all come with unique experiences and perspectives. That's why data is a fabulous place to think about gender diversity, is because nobody else around the table that's male oriented thinks about those things. If you've never read the book by Carolyn Criado Perez, it's one of my favorite, which talks about like gender biases in data sets. So if you think about, God, why is this seatbelt in my car like strangling me? Because it was built for a 5'8", 160-pound male, and that's exactly why. And so it's up to us as we think about how do we really make sure that organizations aren't even thinking, it's not deliberate, right? It's not intentional. And so let's make sure that data, more than anywhere, we're giving a voice to sort of that gender diversity. Sorry, but that ends.
Thanks, Robin. There was a question on the front here.
Hello. Firstly, thank you so much for sharing the personal situation you're in. I think that's super, important to do, and just want to say thank you. I'm sure from the whole room as well. But during that period, I can imagine obviously your mind was not focused on your career. It was probably just about getting in, getting it done, going home. I don't want to ask, but whatever period in your career that was, I'm sure you already had the cheerleaders and the champions for you in your career. So I suppose, how did you balance knowing that you wanted to do well in your career versus, and then these people telling you, oh, you really need to go for this opportunity, versus just knowing you had nothing to give to that space?
Yeah, I think for me it was finding just the couple of real allies, right, who knew what were going on. Those were the ones that I could turn to say, I can't take this opportunity right now. And so how do we think about the right way to sort of position so that I'm not closing the door forever? Because at some point, right, I wanted to have that opportunity again. And so very few people at work actually knew what was going on. My immediate manager, who I would probably say he was one of my strongest allies through that whole thing. Literally, if I would call him and say, guess what? We were found, I have to move the kids overnight tonight, like no questions asked. And so I needed that, but I also had to give myself forgiveness and sort of be a little graceful with myself, or gracious, I guess, and say, you know what, it's okay that I can't take on that extra project. It's okay that I can't do that thing right now. I will get to the point where I can do those things. So.
Hello? Okay, sorry, I was just checking it worked. So my question is, my mentor mentioned it to me the other day, which is imposter syndrome. So I was wondering, apparently that's really common in women, and apparently I have it in bucket loads. And I was wondering, throughout your career, have you ever experienced a feeling of not thinking that you can do it, and trying to kind of overcome that challenge yourself and believe in yourself? I know that sounds a bit, wishy-washy, but
oh my
how
gosh,
did you
welcome
come
to the
over
club. Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have I had imposter syndrome yesterday, right? Like, you just get asked these questions sometimes and you're thinking, what was I thinking? Particularly in my case right now, I left a company that I had been at for 23 years and I went to a startup, right, in a completely different sort of C role, and the people around me are brilliant minds. And I'm thinking, what the heck did I do? Like, I should not be in this room or this conversation at all. And I just have to take a step back and say, you know what? They hired me because of this superpower, because of this strength, and nobody else around the table has that capability or those experiences. And that's when I'm going to plant my flag in. So I would love to tell you that goes away, but it never goes away. You're always going to have that, but just make sure that you're grounded in what are your superpowers? Why are you there around the table? And if you can ground and center in that and focus on those things, that's where you're going to sort of overcome some of that.
You're absolutely right. I think we all feel imposter syndrome in abundance, daily, monthly. It doesn't go away at all, does it, Robin? I'm just going to pass over to this gentleman.
Just try not to cry in the boardroom. That's always the...
Hello. So I was in the military for 18 years, and it's quite a struggle leaving the military and then transitioning into civic street, as we call it. What would you say would be the best way to build that network? It's taken me nearly 6 years to get where I am today, but how could I speed that up?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm seeing more and more actually military come into tech field. And I think there's a real opportunity. I just had a conversation earlier last week, I think, with a new startup who's really trying to figure out how do we bridge that gap. I know organizations like Microsoft, like Databricks, have whole motions around how do we hire veterans, how do we think about leveraging those experiences into the technology field, and could we bring those perspectives in? So I think part of it is, connect with the communities. So find another veteran in your organization. There's military ERGs, I know, in many, many organizations. So leverage them to sort of expand that network, because the only way I think that we're going to help people with that transition is ex-military bringing in new military into those conversations. I would say it's women, right? Like you have to have strong allies, strong female leadership that are going to be targeted in that audience and bring them in. And so I think with all of them, I have to admit, the first job I got out of the military, the only reason I got that job turning screwdrivers to replace motherboards, he was prior service. No, that was the only reason I got that job.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. There was one on the end.
Thanks again for sharing stories. So next week, I am asking for a promotion and a pay rise. Never done this before. I'm a little bit nervous, but thank you very much. Do you have any advice for myself and also for maybe some other ladies in here who might need a bit of confidence on in having those conversations?
So there's a couple of approaches. I can tell you what I did at Microsoft, right? So when I was in Microsoft and I really wanted that next level, that next role, that next area of responsibility, more money, I was very data driven. Went through the entire job description and essentially said, look, you want this skill, I've demonstrated this skill, this is how I've done it, and here's the measurable impact, right? So create your own KPIs and OKRs around those things that you can go back to the business to say, this is what has justified that I'm capable of performing at that level today and the value that you're getting out of me performing at that level. It was interesting to me to sort of negotiate a new salary and a new level when I left Microsoft and went to Databricks, right? Because at Microsoft, you get your merit every year, you get sort of your cost of living increase, et cetera. But now I had a chance to start over, right? I wasn't now trying to build on a salary that I was given 23 years ago, which, by the way, was way lower than what the market is making now. And for that, I sought out explicitly male allies that were doing this role to say, am I asking for a fair salary? Is this a fair price? Is this within the range, you're right, of what you would think somebody of these experiences or capabilities could do? And I have to admit, I'm so glad I did that, because like one of my male allies came back with a much bigger package than I would have ever asked for. In fact, I cried a little bit with imposter syndrome when I sent it, saying, oh my gosh, what am I thinking? They're going to come back and say, we take back the offer. But sure enough, that's not what happened. And so I'm in a much better place for leveraging sort of those people that had the knowledge, because you just don't know, right? And so make sure that you have the knowledge. And then for me, being very data driven on why me, what are the skills, what are my competencies, and what's the value for you?
Also, Joanna, we did meet earlier. If you don't get it, come and find us. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the Women in Data community that will absolutely add that value. So you've been here at the takeover stage for Women in Data, Big Data London. this is not the end. There's so much more to come. We have the brilliant Tess Merkelova up next at 3 o'clock, and she's going to be focusing on asking the right questions. So please hang around. 3 o'clock start time for that. Robin, you've been amazing. Thank you. You've been so
Thank you very
honest
much.
and authentic, as you always are. Thank you.
Thank you.